Hello, good afternoon. Hi, so my name is Dr. Elizabeth Klaczynski. I'm an associate curator of exhibitions here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this noontime lecture in our Scholar Series. First, we wish to acknowledge the generous support of Conrad Mercer Hall, who has endowed the VMHC Scholar Series. Conrad serves as an honorary vice chair of the Board of Trustees of this institution and has been a champion of our work for decades. We also wish to acknowledge the former VMHC president and CEO, Dr. Charles F. Bryan, whom this series also honors. And just a quick update on upcoming programs. Please join us again next Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock for our next installment of the Scholar Series, when Heath Hardage Lee will be discussing her latest book, The Mysterious Mrs. Nixon, The Life and Times of Washington's Most Private First Lady. And also, as you may know, the VMHC has launched a full slate of programs commemorating America's 250th anniversary. Next Monday, February 17th, the public, which is you all, is invited to celebrate President's Day here at the VMHC with a naturalization ceremony and reception. The ceremony begins at 11 o'clock a.m. and will be followed by special activities such as a gallery scavenger hunt for the kids and a display of archival treasures related to the presidency in the E. Claiborne Robbins Jr. Research Library. So before we begin today's talk, this is your gentle reminder to please silence your mobile devices if you haven't already done so. And we are joined here today with Stephanie Deutsch. Just to introduce her talk, Julius Rosenwald's remarkable philanthropy is perhaps best remembered by the school construction program he and Booker T. Washington created in the early 20th century. The program created almost 5,000 schools for Black children throughout the South during the height of Jim Crow. Thousands of children were able to access quality education and build brighter futures for themselves and their families. If you have not yet seen it, we currently have an exhibition exploring this history entitled A Better Life for Their Children, Julius Rosenwald, Booker T. Washington, and the 4,978 Schools That Changed America, and that is currently up in our Good Gallery. So please check that out if you have not already done so. But just to note, the Rosenwald School program is just one part of Julius Rosenwald's legacy. Rosenwald was ultimately driven by investing in people. Over 900 Black men and women received funding as Rosenwald Fellows in the 1930s and 40s. The Rosenwald Fellowship awarded grants to prominent Black artists, educators, writers, and scholars. Many Rosenwald Fellows would also become leaders in the civil rights movement and in the effort to desegregate schools. Carter G. Woodson, a Virginia native and regarded as the father of Black history, was one such Rosenwald Fellow. His connection with Julius Rosenwald helped Woodson become the first Black historian to seriously study African American history and to establish Black History Month, which we're celebrating this February, of course. Their relationship will be explored in this talk, as will the contemporary campaign to create the Julius Rosenwald and Rosenwald Schools National Historic Site. So here today to talk us through Rosenwald's legacy is Stephanie Deutsch. She has written for the New York Times, the Millions blog, and various neighborhood newspapers. She is the author of You Need a Schoolhouse, Booker T. Washington, Julius Rosenwald, and the Building of Schools for the Segregated South. Stephanie sits on the board of the campaign to create a Julius Rosenwald and Rosenwald Schools National Historic Site. She lives in Washington, D.C., and is married to David Deutsch, a great-grandson of Julius Rosenwald. So please join me in welcoming very warmly Stephanie Deutsch.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say that one of the joys for me of researching and writing about Rosenwald has been the friendships that it's brought me, the people that I have gotten to know through this work. It's been a wonderful journey that I feel like we've all kind of taken together, because I was lucky that my work kind of coincided with a lot of renovation and restoration of Rosenwald schools, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. But it's great to see so many of you here that I've crossed paths with along the way. And it's great to be here with Andrew Feiler's wonderful photo show, which if you haven't seen it, I do urge you to go. It's beautiful pictures. And so if you have seen that show, you may be familiar with the basic outlines of the story of Julius Rosenwald, how he was a child of German Jewish immigrants, grew up in Springfield, Illinois, across the street from Abraham Lincoln's house, just young enough that he didn't cross paths with Lincoln, but became involved with the renowned Black educator Booker T. Washington, and how these two men from very disparate backgrounds became friends, and their relationship led to the creation of, I always say 5,000, it's not quite 5,000, but 5,000 schoolhouses for African-American children across the South. Here's the young Julius as he was when he made the astute decision to buy into a small unknown mail order company called Sears Roebuck. That was a decision that changed his life. And what was fascinating about the partnership that it led to with Booker T. Washington was that it was a three-way partnership. It wasn't Julius giving money to build schools. It was Julius partnering with African-American communities throughout the South, and then partnering further with the local governments that were obligated by law to provide education for all their children, but doing it very unequally, dividing their money between Black children and white children. And the program ultimately led to the creation of 4,000, as you heard, 4,978 schools. And there you can see where they are. There was 385 of them here in Virginia. So what was it that led to Rosenwald's steady dedication to using his money in the service of others? Well, his Jewish background, of course, was highly significant. As a child, he learned the commitment to tzedakah, which is giving based not on a sense of charity, caritas, love and care for others, but based on a sense of righteousness. If you have more than you need, it is your duty to give to others, and especially to give to them in a way that empowers them. It doesn't make them grateful, it makes them stronger and more capable. Even before he was a wealthy man, Julius was donating money to his temple in Chicago, and he's quoted as having said as a young man that his goal in life was to have an income of $15,000. So he could have $5,000 to live on, $5,000 to save, and $5,000 to give away. He was heavily influenced by his rabbi, Emil Hirsch, who preached something very akin to what Christians were hearing as the social gospel, that idea of responsibility for one's fellows. He was also developing a sense of solidarity with African Americans, and the sense that it was solidarity among Jews that allowed them to cope with what they faced in Europe, and the solidarity among African Americans that was coalescing around the victimization they were experiencing. In 1895, Julius made the astute decision to buy into Sears Roebuck, as I mentioned, and by 1906, he was wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. Mail order, of course, was a concept with a promise, and I think we can understand a little bit because what we experienced with the internet is sort of similar. Suddenly, you didn't go to the store to buy a pair of shoes, you just went online. And that's what people in farms and rural areas were experiencing with Sears. As a newly wealthy man, Julius did some of the things we might all do. He bought a big house. He went to Germany to visit his relatives there. And you can see Julius in the middle. And these are the Rosenwald children. That's his son, Lessing, and on the far end of the second row. And these are the other children in front. So he went to visit his relatives in Germany, bought a big house, but he also started to think seriously about philanthropy. And he started with Jewish philanthropy But as I said, he quickly became interested in American Blacks. Partly this was the result of the 1908 riot in Springfield, Illinois, where he had grown up. And he wasn't there at the time, but it was on the front page of the Chicago paper for 3 days. And Julius began to equate that this is the period when American Jews are donating money to help Jews in Europe who are recovering from pogroms there. And Julius began to sense that these were two similar things that were happening. About that time, one of his colleagues gave him a copy of Up From Slavery. And so he became even more interested in African Americans. When he was asked to donate to a YMCA in Chicago, YMCA, Young Men's Christian Association, he said, well, no, he would leave that to his Christian brothers. But when they thought about creating a YMCA for Black people, to come back and see him. Well, they lost no time in coming back to see him. And in one of the accounts I read, it said that they were completely astounded when he said, yeah, I'll donate to a YMCA in Chicago, and I'll give $75,000 to any YMCA across the country that can raise $25,000 for a YMCA for Black people. And ultimately, 27 cities built Black YMCAs based on this grant. In 1911, he had the opportunity to meet Booker T. Washington, and they were anxious to meet each other because Washington, as many of you know, had been the founder of Tuskegee, and one of the things that he was quite brilliant at was cultivating people of means and encouraging them to donate to Tuskegee. And so he traveled frequently. He came to Chicago for an anniversary of the YMCA. Julius had a luncheon to introduce him to the leaders of the Chicago leaders, and then took him out to have lunch at Sears, where there certainly had never been a Black person in the executive dining room before. And I like to imagine these two men, yeah, they were different, but they were also like, each guy had his domain that he wanted to show off. So after Julius had showed off Sears, Washington said, well, now you got to come down and visit Tuskegee. So Julius did. He filled a private railroad car with family. He got Rabbi Hirsch to come with him. One of his wife's good friends was Jane Addams, who had founded Hull House. She came. They went down to Tuskegee, and they spent 3 days on the campus. This is the campus of Tuskegee. Some of you, I imagine, have been there. It's a beautiful campus that was actually built by the students there. The bricks were actually made there. The buildings were designed there. It's a remarkable place. I've heard it said, you can see in the corner the American flag, that the American flag hadn't been seen in that part of Alabama since after the Civil War, but they started flying it at Tuskegee. Julius was incredibly impressed by what he saw at Tuskegee. He agreed to join the board of Tuskegee, and he and Washington saw in each other potential partners. Washington came to visit in Chicago and came as a house guest to the Rosenwald home. And I was lucky enough to interview one of Julius's children. He was in his 90s when I got to talk to him, but he'd been a boy of 10 when Booker T. Washington came. And I said to him, well, gosh, what was that like? What do you remember? And he said, I don't remember anything about Booker T. Washington. What I remember is that he and my father disappeared into his office and spent a lot of time talking. And I wondered what they were talking about. Well, I think I know. I think Washington was sharing with Julius the fact that African Americans in the communities across the South were desperate for education. They had been deprived education themselves. Their forebears had been deprived education, but this was what they wanted in freedom. They wanted to provide education for their children. The beautiful name of Andrew's show, A Better Life for Their Children. And they thought they could do this through schools. Julius heard from Booker T. Washington that he was being inundated with letters from people in small communities across the South saying, we don't have much here, but we're raising money. We want to build a schoolhouse. Can you help? And so they came up with the plan that created the first 6 Rosenwald schools. This is one of them. This is in a place called Cheehaw, not too far from Tuskegee. You can see it's very rural. And this is one of my favorite pictures because it shows the whole community that turned out to greet Rosenwald when he went down to visit. It wasn't just doing something for the children in the community by creating a school. He was doing something for the whole community. And so, as I said, they created a program that involved the community raising money, Rosenwald giving money, and then the states, the local jurisdictions, providing the vast majority of the money. Dollar for dollar, people in the communities gave more than Julius Rosenwald. Not a lot more, but I do find that fact absolutely astounding. So the schools grew exponentially. There were 5,000 of them. As segregation ended, the schools were no longer needed. And as I mentioned, it was my good fortune to be doing my work as alumni groups were coming together to save schools. This is the first Rosenwald school I visited, and it's in Rappahannock County, Virginia. This was 15 years ago. It's called the Scrabble School. And I think the story is particularly telling. A man named Franklin Warner had attended this school. He left the area and moved to Washington, D.C., where he worked for the Office of Management and Budget. When he retired, he moved back home, and he saw that the county had boarded up the school and placed the county dump on the grounds. And he didn't like that, and he started bringing attention to it and lobbying. And so the county decided to restore the school. At that time, Lowe's home improvement stores were giving grants to restore Rosenwald schools. And I was able to go back when the school reopened as the county senior center. And there were actually some people who were coming to the senior center who had been to that place as students. So it was a joy to meet them, and I'm still in touch with them, and actually on their board. I love this picture because this is a school very close to here, Second Union Rosenwald School. And in the middle, you see Calvin Hopkins, who was instrumental in restoring the school. And in the display upstairs, you can see Calvin's, is it your first grade report card? Yeah, you can check and see how he was doing. But the movement to restore the schools was powerful among alumni because they cherish this piece of their history and they don't want it to disappear. So the schools were incredibly important. Oh, this is a picture from the show upstairs, and Andrew actually gave me this picture. It hangs in my kitchen. I love this. It's I'm forgetting their names. Frank and Charles Brinkley. It's the Brinkley brothers. Their father was the principal of the school. They went to the school. I visited Cairo School with Peter Ascoli, who's the grandson of Julius Rosenwald, and their mother was there, and she said, I just have to come up and give this guy a big hug because I am so grateful. Notice the picture on the wall behind them. Many Rosenwald schools did have pictures of Julius Rosenwald, although it's odd, many of the schools had no indication that it was a Rosenwald school. It wasn't in the name of the school. There was no picture of the school. But anyway, the schools, powerful as they were not the only way that Julius Rosenwald invested in people. Having been influenced by Booker T. Washington, who emphasized the need for education, Rosenwald now pivoted and built on the ideas that had been put forth by W.B. Du Bois and about the talented 10th. And one of the first people Julius invested in, he actually wasn't a Rosenwald fellow, but they got to know each other. This is Carter Woodson. And I'm sure some of you probably know that Carter Woodson was from Virginia. He was the oldest child of former slaves, oldest of 9 children. He grew up in Buckingham County, had a very difficult early life, as you can imagine, but he managed to go to college. He went to Berea College in Kentucky, which is significant because it was founded to be both coeducational male-female and coeducational black-white. So he got educated there. He managed to go to the University of Chicago, to travel to Europe and get a master's degree in history and then a PhD from Harvard. He was the second African-American to get a PhD from Harvard. In 1916, he went to Chicago for a celebration of the 50th anniversary of emancipation, sponsored by the state of Illinois. And while he was there, he decided to form an organization to promote the study of Black life and history. A nice detail, that meeting was held in the Rosenwald-funded Wabash Avenue YMCA. So he formed the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, and one of his earliest funders was Julius Rosenwald. He founded Negro History Week in 1926, which in 1974 became Black History Month, widely observed today. He spent most of his career writing and researching Black history and promoting the importance of this work. The Journal of African American History that he created still exists. Now, Carter Woodson was a difficult man. His passion and his determination could be off-putting to others, but he never lost the respect and support of Julius Rosenwald. His home and office in Northwest Washington, D.C. are now a National Park Service site, and I think if you look on the wall behind him, you'll see the same portrait of Julius Rosenwald that hung in the school. He greatly admired Rosenwald. This is a statue in Washington, D.C., which I think is quite wonderful, that commemorates Woodson. So there's another hugely important investment in people, which is in 1928, Julius Rosenwald was retiring from Sears, and he wanted to get his philanthropy into the hands of professional management. So he hired a man named Edwin Embree. The two men had met when they both served on the board of the Rockefeller Foundation. And Embree was a perfect fit. He had grown up on the campus of Berea College. His grandfather was abolitionist John Fee, who founded Berea College. Embree is the second from the left. You can see him there visiting a Rosenwald school. And Embree was an interesting guy, an early proponent of the relatively new sciences of sociology and anthropology, just very interested in all kinds of things. And at the first board meeting, when he was in charge in 1928, he put forward a proposal that had been suggested by two noted Black cultural leaders. One was James Weldon Johnson, who I'm sure you all know was the author of Lift Every Voice and Sing, and also the editor of the NAACP's Crisis magazine. And Charles Johnson, he was a PhD in sociology from the University of Chicago, and he and Julius had gotten to know each other when they both served on the mayor's commission to investigate the cause of the 1919 Chicago race riot. So they knew each other. Johnson later moved to New York, worked for the Urban League there, and even after that, he was the first Black president of Fisk University. So these two men noted that African Americans we're now at the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, and African Americans are starting to gain recognition in the arts. So they proposed a program that would give funding to encourage and assist individuals of promise. The fellowships would be for a year, they could be renewed, and it would be enough to allow a year of creative work or of study or of travel. There were about 1,500 of these fellowships awarded between 1928 and 1948, 2/3 of them to African Americans, and they are a remarkable who's who of Black achievement in every field, from the arts to scholarship, to science, to practical fields like agronomy, library science, nursing, public administration, and home economics. One of the very first Rosenwald Fellows went to a sculptor named Augusta Savage. And if you saw the Aviva Kempner documentary about Julius Rosenwald, she has a thing at the end about the wonderful statue of choristers singing that Augusta Savage did for the World's Fair in 1936, I think it was. W.B. Du Bois was a Rosenwald Fellow. This is a statue of him on the campus of Fisk University. Marian Anderson, the wonderful singer, traveled to Germany to study voice on her Rosenwald Fellowship. This is James Baldwin, the writer, Rosenwald Fellow. Invisible Man was written by Ralph Ellison with the assistance of his Rosenwald Fellowship. He was a notoriously slow worker. It took him many years to complete this book. One of the fellows that I had never heard of, Aaron Douglas, a wonderful painter who was the head of the art department at Fisk, and painted murals in the administration building at Fisk and in the Schomburg Library in New York. I love this picture of Noah's Ark. He had a very distinctive and just very wonderful style. Elizabeth Catlett, she was a wonderful printmaker, artist, sculptor. The National Gallery is going to have this spring a major retrospective of her work, and she's just a wonderful artist. And then you all probably know the Migration series by Jacob Lawrence, which he created while on his Rosenwald Fellowship. Half of these, there are 60 panels in this series. Half of them are in Washington, D.C. at the Phillips Collection, and the other half are in New York at the Museum of Modern Art. There are a lot of other fellows who are not as well known. Well, one who is very well known, Ralph Bunche. There we go. Ralph Bunche was the UN ambassador and won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1950. Very significant. He used his Rosenwald Fellowship to travel to Africa for the first time. There were others who were less well known, but these awards to fellows created generations of achievement at high levels. One was Dorothy Porter Wesley. She received 3 Rosenwald Fellow grants. She became the head librarian for 40 years at Howard University and established the hugely important Moreland Spingarn Research Center there, a collection of African and African-American history. Simon Haley was a professor of agriculture. He was the father of Alex Haley, the author of Roots. And a fellow who it was my privilege to meet was a man named Samuel Myers. In 1948, he got one of the last fellowships that enabled him to complete his PhD in economics at Harvard. He went on to work in the Johnson administration at the EEOC, and then as president of Bowie State University. And he told me that the fellowship brought not just money, of course he needed the money, but it also brought prestige. And his son is now also an economist. He teaches at the University of Minnesota and has written a scholarly article about the impact of Rosenwald funding in creating a whole generation of Black economists. There were also some interesting white fellows. One was Woody Guthrie. Another was Ralph McGill, an Atlanta newspaper editor who was strongly supportive of integration, and there's a major highway in Atlanta named for him. And another was C. Vann Woodward, the writer and historian who wrote The Strange Case of Jim Crow. It is impossible to overstate the impact of Rosenwald Fellows. Woodward, C. Vann Woodward, was one of 10 Rosenwald Fellows whose work informed the legal briefs that went into the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision that ruled segregation in education unconstitutional. Other Black fellows involved in the briefs were Pauli Murray, a lawyer from North Carolina who wrote a book that Thurgood Marshall called the Bible of Brown versus Board. It was a description of the huge variety of segregation laws that there were in all different places across the country. Horace Mann Bond, who was a historian of education and the father of NAACP President Julian Bond, an activist Julian Bond. Allison Davis, a name that's not well known, but he and his wife were sociologists. And Isabel Wilkerson, in her book Caste, has a whole chapter about the importance of their study of the American South. John Hope Franklin, a preeminent Black historian, was a Rosenwald Fellow. And then Kenneth Clark and Mamie Phipps Clark were psychologists who devised the doll experiment that they used to demonstrate how the self-esteem of Black children was eroded by segregation in education. And this photograph that so palpably captures that was taken by another well-known Rosenwald Fellow, which was photographer Gordon Parks. So unlike other philanthropists, Julius Rosenwald did not support the idea of perpetual endowments. He strongly believed that each generation will create wealth, and each generation will as well create men and women of goodwill who want to use their wealth to do good. He designed his fund to put itself out of business within 25 years of his death. Rosenwald died in January 1932, and the Rosenwald Fund closed down in 1948. And this helps explain why Julius Rosenwald is no longer well remembered today. We all know the Ford Foundation, we all know the Carnegie, but Rosenwald specifically intended his foundation to close down. But another of Rosenwald's convictions was that because he had made a lot of money did not necessarily mean that he was brilliant. It was not up to him to come up with, to solve society's problems. What he did see as a responsibility conferred on him by his tremendous wealth was to use that wealth to empower others to wrestle with the problems of their time. By helping communities to provide schoolhouses that educated a third of the African-American children in the South during the 20s, 30s, and 40s, he invested in several generations, creating well-educated men and women, people who had a sense of citizenship and the courage to embrace the civil rights movement as it emerged. You probably know Congressman John Lewis went to a Rosenwald school, as did Medgar Evers, and as did many of the unsung heroes of the movement. By investing in men and women of academic and artistic promise, Rosenwald helped American society become stronger and more dynamic, more ready and able to cope with the fallout from our tragic history of slavery, racial segregation, and discrimination. And finally, in Carter Woodson, Rosenwald invested in a man whose influence would be felt across the country by school children everywhere as they experienced first Negro History Week and now Black History Month. You all probably know that he chose February because Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass both had their birthdays in February. And I just learned that actually John Lewis also had his birthday in February. So it was a suitable choice. But it's a time to reflect on our past, to have programs like this one, to acknowledge and lament the injustices that were spawned, and to celebrate the remarkable men and women of color who contributed so much to our country. And now you'll allow me a personal moment. This was a satisfying thing for me. I went to a kindergarten presentation at the public school where my grandson was in Washington, D.C., only to find that he was playing the role of Dr. Charles Drew, who did work creating, studying blood plasma and creating the blood bank, and is credited with saving many, many thousands of lives during World War II. A final note, as was mentioned, there is now a campaign to create a Julius Rosenwald and Rosenwald Schools National Historical Site. And considerable progress has been made towards that. Legislation passed Congress acknowledging that this was a story that should be preserved in a National Park Service site. There is actually currently no National Park Service site honoring a Jewish American. There are some sites that reference Jewish history, but no site referencing a Jewish American. So it is my hope that that will be coming along sometime in the future. And I urge you to, if you are interested, go to our website, sign up for our newsletter. We put out a newsletter 4 times a year and sometimes more. And it's very lively. And so all that said, I'd love to take your questions if you have any.
Thank you so very much. And before we take questions, I do want to acknowledge that we have some Rosenwald School alums in the audience today. So if you are comfortable, you can stand up or give a little wave, and we would all just like to acknowledge you as well. Thank you so very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. I think I'm kind of an almost grand alum. My father was unable to go past 6th grade in Adams Grove, Virginia, but his older brother, my uncle, was just in time for the opening of Greensville Training Academy in Emporia. So the older brothers in the family have high school degrees. The younger brothers in the family do not. So many thanks to Rosenwald. Thanks to the museum for the exhibit upstairs. It's fabulous. Thanks to you for the research you're doing. I came across a building in Newsoms, Virginia, when I was looking for my mother's side of the family that looked to me like a Rosenwald school. And I sent a picture of it to Andrew Feiler. And he told me about, because I couldn't find it in any of the lists, he told me about a category of schools that are called Rosenwald era schools. And what he explained was that they would give the plans to virtually any community that wanted them. If they couldn't come up with that tripartite funding formula that you described, they would just give the plans to both Blacks and whites who wanted them. And the picture that I had found what looked to him, since it wasn't on anything, like a Rosenwald era school. Does this effort, or is there any way of incorporating or spooning the Rosenwald era schools? Because then you'll get over the 5,000 figure, I'm sure, with that into the mix.
Well, thank you for that. I'm reminded that on my way to Second Union School many years ago, I passed a school by the side of the road that looked exactly like Second Union. And I asked Calvin about it, and he said, oh, that was the white school. And it's true that they did make the plans available. One wonderful tool that is not available right now, but that's coming back, is that the records of the Rosenwald School program are in Fisk University in Nashville. And they have a database of all the schools at the time of construction. The database has been offline for an annoying period of time, but the plan is it's supposed to come back this spring. With that database, you can check a county. You could go to, I forget what you said the name of the county was, but you could go to that county, go to Virginia, go to that county, and they would show you all the schools, and sometimes there are photographs of them, so you could research it that way. As to whether they have records of every school that every community that they gave the plans to, that I don't know. But it would also be at Fisk. And they're digitizing their entire collection. So there's going to be a wonderful trove of stuff to look through.
I think you mentioned that the funds came from Rosenwald and then the Black community. And you said other local localities or the locals. Given the strength of Jim Crow and segregation, who were the others that contributed? Were they white people, Black people?
That's a good question. In this file that I described at Fisk, for each school that they list, they have a card. And on the card, it'll say funding, Rosenwald, X number of money, Negroes, white, public. That said, I can't tell you exactly who those white people were. There may be communities where those records exist, and maybe when all this stuff at Fisk comes online, we'll find that. But, you know, there were people, just as there were people of ill will, there were people of goodwill in these communities. And also a less attractive aspect of that is that there were places where they felt desperate to keep, they wanted, as the Northern migration started, they wanted to keep their workers there. They wanted to keep their Black community there. So there may have been people who thought, well, I'm going to contribute to this school because they're not going to go move to Chicago if we have a school. And I mean, that was part of the motivation in some cases. But and the donations weren't just financial. The donations were land. The schools are often located next to, like Second Union, next to a church. And the churches had land. And so often there was a requirement that there had to be 2 acres. And so the land was donated. Sometimes the materials were donated and the labor was often donated. One of the stories that I love is that early on in their conversation, Julius, ever the businessman, said, well, maybe we could make the schools out of Sears kit houses. Remember Sears? You could buy a house from Sears, and they had an astonishing number of different models. I mean, there were like 30 different models. And Booker T. Washington said, I wish I could have seen this conversation. Said, well, no, the whole point is we want there to be work in the local communities. We want the people there to build the school. We don't want them nailing together a Sears kit house. So I don't know if that begins to answer your question, but yeah.
Hello. Hi, Stephanie. I'm Deborah Hanson from Brunswick County.
Oh, hi.
And I just wanted to share something. First of all, I would like to share my mother attended a Rosenwald school in Northampton County, North Carolina. My great-grandmother taught at a Rosenwald school in Northampton, North Carolina. And what I wanted to share is I'm an alum of St. Paul's College in Lawrenceville, Brunswick County. And I'm grateful because I did find through my research that Mr. Rosenwald contributed to several HBCUs, and my HBCU was one of those. And when I had a chance to visit the museum last year, I saw the huge portrait of him at the St. Paul's College Museum. So I just wanted to say,
go there.
So I just wanted to say thank you. And also I was pleased to hear that he also funded some of the bookmobiles and, as I said, other HBCUs. So thank you for your work. It's been a great resource for me in my research.
Oh, thank you for that. One of the an HBCU that I've never visited is Bennett College in North Carolina, where there are murals, I understand, by Aaron Douglas, the painter that I so admire, and Rosenwald made contributions to that. Yeah, the Rosenwald Fund contributed to a huge array of different things.
Is there any information about the conflict with how the Klan and other racist groups responded to these? Any documentation in that way?
There's no pulled together documentation, but remember the cards that I talked about that had a picture stapled on one side and then on the other side? Sometimes written in ink, there would be the word burned. Now, these were wooden structures, and I assume some of them burned accidentally, but there definitely were cases where the schools were burned. There's a book, I'm not going to be able to call up the name of it, but about a county in Arkansas where there had been a lot of Klan activity. And so they made elaborate plans to get all the materials delivered at the same time and to, like, in 3 days, put up 5 different schools and to just kind of show their determination that way. But yeah, there was opposition. And as I say, that word burned. They weren't all accidents.
How you doing, Ms. Deutsch?
Hi.
My name is Dennis Harvey, and I have some comments, and I do have a question that if I can get through my comments. I attended maybe 3 Rosenwald schools in Halifax County, North Carolina. And I'm here to give a thank you to the Rosenwald Foundations on behalf of my family, and an apology to you. But first, my thank you is on behalf of my family. I tried to get some of my family members to come to the lecture today, but when they found out when they found out there actually had to be a reason for Rosenwald schools, they were kind of traumatized at that, and they didn't feel comfortable even talking about it. But after doing research on Rosenwald schools, I really appreciate it, and thank you for the Rosenwald Foundation on behalf of my family. One relationship, I heard someone ask, were there other people who were working with Mr. Rosenwald? And one of them I think of is Mr. George Eastman, founder of Eastman Kodak camera and film. And I actually lived in one of Mr. Eastman's hunting lodges before moving to Virginia. And I found out that Mr. Rosenwald and Mr. Eastman used to come to my hometown county to hunt. And they saw the situation of rural, and when I say rural, I mean children that lived out there. And my family lived on farms that sent their children to Rosenwald schools. And I hate to think of what would my life and my family's life being without Rosenwald schools. Found out that Mr. Rosenwald and Mr. Eastman came to our county to hunt. And both of them saw the condition of Black students out in the country. And Mr. George Eastman also worked with Mr. Rosenwald. And I have pictures of that hunting lodge. And I remember where my bedroom was there. And a family member actually built Rosenwald schools in my county. And I was at the opening where you were also, the Allen Grove Rosenwald School. And I kind of gave you a hard time on a writer. And I thought about it when I wrote a book on Richmond's two iconic historic Black high schools, Armstrong High School and Maggie L. Walker High School. And I really didn't understand what went into writing a book until I tried. So I apologize. I've been carrying this apology around for about 10 years.
I have to tell you, if you gave me a hard time, I don't remember.
And I was thinking you probably didn't remember, and I'm glad that you don't. I've been carrying my well-used You Need a School book around since then. And before we leave, I'd like for you to sign it.
Well, I'd love to. Can I ask you which schools you went to?
I attended Armstrong High School, in North Carolina.
Schools, yeah.
It was Draper, it was Wayman, and it was Springfield, but I was born across the road from historic Brick College, which a lot of people don't know. And my family member, which was Carrie Pittman, actually built the Allen Grove School and built the school that I attended.
Okay.
And the high school where I lived, where Mr. Eastman's hunting lodge was Eastman High School. And exactly where I was living in that hunting lodge, they're actually building a new $52 million school on the site where I went. I wish I could have stayed a little longer. But my question is, in today's climate on the attack against diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as DEI, and now an attack on getting rid of the Department of Education, do you have an opinion, or what is your opinion? You don't have to answer. I'm just wondering.
Well, thank you for that. But I will answer.
All right.
I will answer. This whole conversation has gotten so heated. And I think we forget that when you say DEI, You mean a whole lot of different things. I heard, and I was shocked to hear, that they had mandated that they're going to stop observing Black History Month at all military schools, at all schools on military bases. Well, to me, this seems insane. Surely we all want to know our history. Surely it's important that we all know our history. And surely acknowledging what happened in our past with African Americans, the discrimination they endured, the courage they manifested in overcoming it. Surely that's part of the story. Surely the story of the Rosenwald schools, for example, is a story we can all take pride in. So, you know, does DEI mean a tedious thing that you're supposed to attend at your new job? Yeah, probably. So it, you know, it covers a whole range of things. But I think the idea of stopping talking about Black history is just crazy. It's crazy. And I'm glad my grandson knows who Dr. Charles Drew was. I think I was an adult before I ever heard of Frederick Douglass. This is not right.
There's a lot of things going on there. Myself and my friend Arthur Ease here, we're from Waynesboro, Virginia, up in the Shenandoah Valley. And I was listening to different areas of schools that some of the African Americans here had talked about. Our school started off up to grades 7. And so it improved, and that's 1924. And but the school was improved on all throughout the years up until integration in 1965. So we had kindergarten to 12th grade school. And it was awesome. It was awesome to grow up in a community that a lot of things that happened in the further South did not happen in Waynesboro, Virginia. Even though they did have Klansmen come through, it was always like, so what? Because with the DuPont company there, the General Electric company there, even in when you head out towards Staunton, Virginia, which was the county seat, they had Westinghouse and ASR, which, you know, for razor blades and different things like that. So a lot of what happened in the rest of the country, when I look back in the history of it, because I do that, and we didn't experience a lot of the ugly. But yet, back to the Rosenwald schools, one of the best things ever happened in our lives. We talk about it all the time. This is something that maybe they never thought about, was maybe we didn't never want to leave the school. You know, who wanted to close a school? What type of people would close 5,000 schools? You see what I'm saying? So look what has happened since the desegregation of the schools. I mean, the school right in our neighborhood, right down the street. All of the, I think it was pretty close to 80% of the African population in Waynesboro and Staunton, Virginia, and those little schools that was built around Rosenwald schools. 80% of the Black people that came from slavery went to Rosenwald schools. We never knew. It was almost like we were living in a little teeny New York City, where 250 that runs here all the way down through. It comes right down through downtown Waynesboro. So there was James Brown, there was Otis Redding coming through a little town like that. But the Rosenwald schools, like in the communities we lived in, it was like 35 acres. Stephanie's been there. And we did our 100th anniversary back in September. I was one day shy of the day it opened. But in going back to someone was talking about any pushback, the only thing they used the school for the Black voters, because Waynesboro was getting ready to consolidate with what they used to call basic. Waynesboro was called basic. It was no Waynesboro. It was coming in to be Waynesboro. So Waynesboro in their consolidation, one side was saying, and they said they're going to build you a new school. Do you really believe that? You know, all that kind of talk. But it wasn't the hateful side of it all. just really a different type of neighborhood. We were actually doing interracial church in 1930s, and maybe probably were doing it before that, because how could you do that? Yeah, I seen where the assistant superintendent of, the superintendent of school's wife, she was the one that was doing all the church stuff. And this is the superintendent of school's wife. They doing all these different types of activities in Waynesboro, Virginia. It was just another world. And you could go on and on. The first principal of Rosenwald School in 1924, when he passed away in 1938, the State Board of Education was only 2 years into existence. And he had taught from 1877 all the way through to Rosenwald School coming in. He taught all the as many Black people in Charlottesville, Waynesboro, and Augusta County. They were already being taught way back when. And the principal of our school was a Rosenwald child. The two principals before him, they also grew up in Rosenwald. They actually became the president of Virginia State from Rosenwald. And there's a lot of great things that happen in the valley that may not have happened around with everybody else's life. I mean, maybe DuPont had a lot to do with that. And, the way you think about things, everybody. But was there hate? Yes, there was some. It wasn't like just something that you dealt with every day of your life. It was a law in the land. So there is no socializing, right? There is no socializing. You can't go into the restaurant and sit down with dinner and stuff like that. So that was the land. So the people recognize that, but when you go through to get your groceries, I've never heard anyone fuss about it. Oh, this person called me a name. Oh, this happened, this. I ended up, as a child coming through, I was the first African-American male to stand in front of the people and deal with them in business through the Postal Service. They had never seen it in the Shenandoah Valley. And that was in the 1980s. So anyway, through Rosenwald's contribution to us, our people went many different places. They're still there. They still continue. Our children, Corey Alexander for UVA, does the ESPN. Kenny Brooks that was at Tech. These are Rosenwald kids. Yeah, it just keeps on and on and on. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I appreciate your time.
Can I just add one thing that I didn't mention? Or are there any more questions? Yeah. There's someone back there. I was just going to say, I'm sure you know that North Carolina had the most Rosenwald schools, 780 or something. Yeah. Yeah, North Carolina had a huge number.
Thank you so much. This is so informative, and I look forward to seeing the exhibition after this talk. I had a question. I was curious about what happened after the schools were built. So Rosenwald was involved in building the school and the plans, the funding. How was he involved in what happened next in terms of getting the staff and students and the continued funding of those schools?
That's a great question. Part of the genius of the program was that these were public schools. So the public authorities took over. The teachers were hired, they were public school teachers that were hired. The curriculum was the state curriculum. That said, there are an awful lot of cases that I've come across where the person who taught at the school was from the community, had been in the community, stayed at the school for many, many years. Another factor that tied the teachers to the community was that because these were very rural places, they often, the teacher would often live with a local family during the week and then go home on the weekends. So that helped cement that relationship with the community. But yeah, it was a public school. So one of the things that a little later on, after the schools were built, the Rosenwald Fund introduced sending packets of books, creating libraries that they gave. There was also another program to create school buses, because if you've talked to a lot of Rosenwald alumni, as I have, one of the recurring stories is we walked 1 mile to school, we walked 2 miles to school, we walked 3 miles to school uphill in both directions. The school, it was far for some of them, and so later on in the program there were school buses. But the fund itself wasn't involved in hiring the teacher, creating the curriculum. That was the state.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yes, in your research, has anyone come up with an estimate as far as how much he gave away in his lifetime and what that would be in today's dollars?
Oh, that figure exists. The figure that I am flashing on is 64 million back then, which is, a lot. You ask your computer, it'll tell you. But that's the figure that always is in mind, 64 million. So it was a lot. It was a lot. And during the time of the fund, they spent it down. They took a heavy hit with the crash. And so after Rosenwald's death, they discontinued the school building program. By then, they had pretty much achieved their goal, which had been to have a school in every county where there were Black students in the 15 states. But yeah, so later on, the fund was doing more programmatic things like sponsoring conferences and the fellowships. But yeah, 64 million is the figure I've always.
Well, thank you. Yes, please. Thank you so very much. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Stephanie Deutsch will be signing books out in the lobby. So if you do not have her book, please purchase one. And again, if you have not yet seen the show, it's in the Good Gallery, which is on our second floor. It's called A Better Life for Their Children. So thank you again for joining us, and thank you for this wonderful talk.